Ethan Drake had faced many difficult situations in his life. Tense diplomatic meetings, high-stakes negotiations, and even a few bar fights in the rougher corners of Mars Station. But nothing had prepared him for this. He was standing in the grand hall of the Scifi Empire, one of the most feared civilizations in the galaxy. The walls of the chamber stretched high, adorned with glowing battle symbols and murals of ancient wars. Towering Scifi warriors lined the sides, their dark, metallic armor gleaming under the artificial light. Their clawed hands rested on energy blades at their waists, watching him like a fragile insect that had wandered into a predator's den. And in the center of the hall, seated upon a raised throne of obsidian and gold, was Princess Valzira. The rumors about her were terrifying. She was the deadliest warrior of her species, undefeated in battle. She had led conquests across the galaxy, crushing entire fleets with nothing but sheer strategy and raw power. Some whispered that she had never even felt fear in her life. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to keep his breathing steady. He was here as part of the Terran Republic's diplomatic mission, an attempt to form a truce with the Scifi. Humans were new to the galactic stage, and they needed allies. The Scifi, on the other hand, had no need for alliances. They took what they wanted. The fact that they even agreed to a negotiation was surprising. A Scifi elder stepped forward, his 4 red eyes locking onto Ethan. "Human," he said in a deep, rumbling voice, "you will present your case before our princess. If she finds you unworthy, there will be no second chance." Ethan cleared his throat. "Esteemed rulers of the Scifi Empire," he began, choosing his words carefully. "The Terran Republic does not seek war. We wish for peace and trade between our people. Together, we can achieve." Silence. The voice cut through the air like a blade. It was cold, commanding, and filled with absolute authority. Ethan froze. Valzira had spoken. Slowly, she stood from her throne. She was tall, taller than any human, with dark armor that shimmered like liquid metal. A long crimson cape trailed behind her as she stepped forward, her piercing golden eyes locked onto him. "Do you know why you are really here, human?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. "To negotiate peace." A faint smirk touched her lips. "No, you are here to entertain me." Before he could react, she descended the steps in one swift motion, faster than anyone her size had the right to move. The guard stepped aside as she approached him, stopping just inches away. Her eyes burned into his. For a single, heart-stopping moment, Ethan met her gaze. The chamber fell silent. A strange tension filled the air, heavy and unexplainable. The Scifi warriors around him suddenly stiffened, some even taking a step back. The elder who had spoken earlier dropped to one knee, his face filled with shock. Ethan's pulse pounded. What just happened? Valzira remained still, her expression unreadable. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "It is done." The elder raised his head. "Princess, this is impossible." She turned to him, her gaze sharp. "It is fate." Ethan had no idea what was happening, but the way the aliens were looking at him now, it wasn't the same as before. Some had expressions of shock, others of fear. The guards, who had seemed so ready to strike him down moments ago, now looked hesitant. What just happened?" Ethan asked, his voice uncertain. The elder looked at him with something between pity and horror. "You met her gaze, human. Now you are bound to her, forever." Ethan blinked. What? Bound how? The elder hesitated, then spoke the words that would change Ethan's life forever. "By our sacred law, when a warrior of the Scifi meets the gaze of another in a moment of intensity, they become battle-bound, soul-linked. It is an unbreakable fate." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "You're saying?" Valzira turned back to him, her golden eyes gleaming. "You are mine now, human." Ethan Drake had always thought of himself as a man who could handle surprises. As a diplomat, he had faced alien creatures with sharp claws, towering warlords, and politicians who could twist words like a blade. But this was something else entirely. He stood frozen in the grand hall of the Scifi Empire, surrounded by warriors who now stared at him with a mix of shock, fear, and disbelief. Princess Valzira, the most feared warrior of her people, had just declared that he was bound to her forever. "There must be some mistake," Ethan said, his voice steady, though his heart pounded like a drum. The Scifi elder shook his head, his red eyes dark with certainty. "There is no mistake. You have met the princess's gaze in a moment of intensity. The bond has been sealed." Ethan frowned. "Okay, but what does that actually mean?" Valzira took a step closer, her golden eyes locked onto his. "It means, human, that from this moment on, you are my battle consort. My fate is tied to yours." Ethan blinked. "Battle consort. That sounds a lot like..." "A partner in war," the elder interrupted. "A soul-bound warrior. The link between you cannot be broken. Wherever she goes, you go. If she fights, you fight. If she falls..." He paused, then gave Ethan a knowing look. "So do you." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Great, just great." The hall remained silent. The Scifi warriors seemed unsure of what to do. Some exchanged nervous glances, as if waiting for someone to intervene. But no one did. The princess had spoken, and her word was law. Finally, Ethan turned back to Valzira. "Look, I don't know how your customs work, but humans don't really do this whole instant warrior bonding thing. So maybe we can just..." "No." Her voice was firm, unshakable. "The bond has been made. It is absolute." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "There has to be a way to undo it." The elder shook his head again. "Only death." Ethan let out a humorless chuckle. "Of course. Always death." Valzira studied him, tilting her head slightly. "You do not seem pleased, human." "Pleased?" Ethan let out a short laugh. "I came here to negotiate peace. Instead, I somehow got myself into an unbreakable warrior bond with a woman who is literally the most feared fighter in the galaxy. No offense, princess, but this wasn't exactly part of my plan." Valzira's gaze did not waver. "Plans change." Ethan sighed. "Yeah, I'm getting that." The elder stepped forward. "The ritual must be completed. The human must be tested." Ethan tensed. "Tested how?" Valzira turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You must prove that you are worthy of standing by my side." Ethan stared at her. "And what happens if I fail?" For the first time, a small smirk touched the princess's lips. "Then you die." Ethan groaned. "You Scifi really need to work on your hospitality." A deep horn sounded through the hall, and the warriors around them straightened. The elder motioned toward a set of heavy doors at the far end of the chamber. "The trial begins now." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He had no idea what kind of test he was about to face, but one thing was certain. He had no choice but to fight. The arena. The chamber was massive, a circular pit of dark stone surrounded by towering walls. At the edges, Scifi warriors watched from elevated platforms, their glowing eyes fixed on him. Ethan stood in the center, unarmed and painfully aware of just how outmatched he was. Valzira stepped onto the opposite side, her crimson cape flowing behind her. A massive energy blade extended from the hilt in her hand, humming with power. "You must land a single strike against me," she said. "Only then will you be acknowledged as my battle consort." Ethan swallowed. "That's it? Just one hit?" The elder let out a deep laugh. "No one has ever succeeded." Ethan took a deep breath. "Great. Absolutely fantastic." Valzira lunged. He barely saw her move before she was right in front of him. He jumped back just in time to avoid the slash of her blade, the air crackling with energy as it passed inches from his chest. Ethan had been in fights before. Bar fights, training drills, even a few self-defense classes back on Earth. But this was something else entirely. Velzira was fast. Too fast. He had no hope of matching her strength or skill. Think, Ethan. You can't win this with brute force. He dodged another strike, barely keeping up. Then he noticed something. The way her stance shifted before each attack. The tiny delay before she struck. She was testing him, measuring his reactions. Fine. He could use that. He waited for her next move. When she lunged again, he didn't dodge. Instead, he dropped to the ground, sliding under her attack. In one smooth motion, he reached up, grabbing the edge of her cape, and yanked. The movement caught her off guard. For just a fraction of a second, she stumbled. Ethan saw his chance. He surged forward, pressing his palm against her shoulder before she could recover. The arena fell silent. Velzira looked down at where he had touched her, then back at him. Slowly, a small dangerous smile spread across her lips. Interesting. The elder stepped forward. The human has succeeded. Murmurs spread through the warriors watching. Some looked shocked, others impressed. Velzira sheathed her blade. You are more capable than I expected, human. Ethan exhaled, still catching his breath. So, does this mean I pass? Velzira nodded. It means that from now on, you are truly mine. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. Yeah, I was afraid you'd say that. His heart still pounded from the fight, and his arms ached from the effort of dodging and countering Princess Velzira's attacks. But somehow, against all odds, he had passed the trial. He had landed a single strike on her, something no other warrior had ever done. And now he was bound to her. Forever. The moment he stepped out of the arena, Scifi warriors watched him differently. Before, they had looked at him with contempt, as if he were an insect unworthy of their attention. Now they observed him with something closer to caution, and in some cases, even respect. But Ethan didn't feel victorious. He felt trapped. 2 guards flanked him as he walked through the halls of the Scifi palace. Velzira walked beside him, her crimson cape flowing behind her like liquid fire. She seemed completely at ease, as if nothing about this situation was unusual. Ethan, on the other hand, was still trying to process everything. So, he said, breaking the silence, now that I've passed your little test, what happens next? Velzira didn't look at him as she responded. Now you train. Ethan frowned. Train? Train for what? For war. Ethan stopped walking. Whoa, hold on. War. Nobody said anything about war. Velzira finally turned to him, her golden eyes calm but unwavering. You are my battle consort now, human. That means you fight beside me in every battle. It is our way. Ethan let out a dry laugh. Yeah, see, that's the problem. I'm not a warrior. I'm a diplomat. I talk my way out of fights. I don't win them. Velzira tilted her head slightly. And yet, you won against me. I got lucky. Perhaps. But luck can be sharpened into skill. Ethan exhaled. Look, princess, there has to be a way too. There is not. Her voice was firm, cutting off any argument. You are bound to me. If I fight, you fight. If I die, you die. Ethan felt a chill run through him. You Scifi really don't believe in second chances, do you? Velzira gave him a sharp look. A warrior does not need second chances. A warrior succeeds or perishes. Ethan muttered under his breath. Great, just great. The guards led him through a towering set of doors, revealing a massive training hall. The chamber was filled with Scifi warriors engaged in brutal combat. Some sparred with energy blades, others wrestled with sheer brute force. The air was thick with the sound of clashing weapons and battle cries. Ethan immediately knew one thing. He did not belong here. Velzira strode to the center of the hall, where a group of warriors stood waiting. A tall, battle-scarred Scifi stepped forward, his 4 red eyes narrowing at Ethan. This is the human, he asked, his voice heavy with doubt. Veilzira nodded. He is to be trained. The warrior scoffed. He will not survive. Ethan threw up his hands. Finally, someone who gets it. Veilzira shot him a look before turning back to the warrior. Then it is your job to ensure he does. The warrior let out a low growl, but nodded. Very well. He turned to Ethan. I am Kortal. You will train with me. If you fail, I will not hesitate to break you. Ethan sighed. Fantastic. Looking forward to it. Thrown into combat. Training was hell. Kortal didn't hold back. He made Ethan spar against Selthera warriors twice his size, forcing him to dodge blows that could have shattered his bones. He was thrown to the ground again and again, forced to stand and fight even when his muscles screamed in protest. Veilzira watched from the sidelines, her expression unreadable. At one point, Ethan collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. Kortal loomed over him. Get up, human. Ethan groaned. Just give me a second. Kortal sneered. Weak. Ethan forced himself up, wiping sweat from his forehead. Yeah, well, humans aren't exactly built like you, big guy. Veilzira suddenly spoke. Strength is not everything. Kortal turned to her, frowning. Princess. Veilzira's gaze remained on Ethan. He did not beat me with strength. He used his mind. Kortal looked back at Ethan, considering her words. Perhaps there is another way to train him. Ethan perked up. Does this new way involve less pain? No. Ethan groaned. Of course not. A different kind of warrior. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's training changed. Instead of focusing on brute strength, Kortal began teaching him strategy and agility. Ethan learned how to use his smaller size to his advantage, how to predict an opponent's attack before it came. He wasn't the strongest fighter in the room, but he was the smartest, and that was something even the Selthera began to respect. Veilzira watched his progress closely. She never praised him, never encouraged him, but there were moments when he caught her staring, a flicker of something unreadable in her golden eyes. One night, as they walked back from the training hall, Ethan spoke. Why did you really let me pass the trial? Veilzira didn't look at him. Because you are different. Ethan frowned. Different how? She finally met his gaze. Because you do not fear me. Ethan let out a breath. I don't know if that makes me brave or just stupid. Veilzira gave him a rare, almost amused look. Perhaps both. For the first time since coming to the Selthera Empire, Ethan felt something strange. Maybe, just maybe, he could survive this. Ethan Drake had spent weeks training under Kortal's brutal guidance, and while he was far from being an elite warrior, he was surviving, which in Selthera standards was an achievement. He had learned how to move faster, react smarter, and fight using his mind rather than brute strength. But despite all the progress, he still wasn't prepared for what came next. His first real mission. The War Council. Ethan stood in a massive war chamber, surrounded by high-ranking Selthera leaders. The room was circular, with a glowing holographic map of a distant planet floating in the center. The warriors around him were armed, battle-scared, and completely focused on the discussion at hand. Veilzira stood at the head of the table, her golden eyes scanning the map. The Khazar Syndicate has invaded the outpost on Vanar 6, she said. They have taken our people hostage. A deep murmur spread through the warriors. The Khazar Syndicate was a ruthless faction of raiders known for their cruelty. They didn't just invade planets, they enslaved them. Kortal grunted. They test us. They think we will not strike back. Veilzira's expression darkened. Then we will prove them wrong. Ethan frowned, crossing his arms. Okay, but how are we going to do that? I mean, I assume we're not just knocking on their front door and asking them nicely to leave. A warrior scoffed. Humans speak too much. Ethan rolled his eyes. And Selthera grunt too much. But we're all here, aren't we? Some warriors glared at him. But Veilzira smirked, just slightly. She turned back to the map. The Khazar have set up defenses. A full-scale attack would be costly. Instead, we send a small strike team to infiltrate their stronghold, disable their shield generator, and open the way for our fleet. Ethan immediately had a bad feeling. And let me guess, I'm part of that strike team. Velzira nodded. You are my battle consort. You fight beside me. Ethan sighed. Yeah, I figured. Kortal clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder. Try not to die, human. Ethan groaned. Great pep talk. Really inspiring. The drop. Hours later, Ethan found himself inside a stealth dropship, soaring through the dark void of space. He was suited up in Xel Theory battle armor, a sleek but heavy design that felt too tight around his chest. Velzira sat across from him, adjusting the energy blade at her side. She looked completely calm, like this was just another ordinary mission. Ethan, on the other hand, felt his stomach twisting. He leaned toward her. So, what's the plan? We sneak in, disable the shields, and get out. Velzira nodded. Yes, and kill anyone who stands in our way. Ethan swallowed. Right. Of course, just casual murder. No big deal. The dropship shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Outside, the dark clouds of Vanar 6 swirled like a storm, lightning flashing in the distance. Ethan exhaled. All right, let's do this. The ship's doors slammed open, and the strike team jumped. Ethan had no time to think before Velzira grabbed him and leaped. The infiltration. They landed in a dense jungle, the damp air filled with the scent of alien vegetation. The Khazar stronghold was visible through the trees, a massive metal fortress, glowing with red lights. Velzira signaled for the team to move. Ethan followed, gripping the Xel Theory plasma pistol they had given him. It felt strange in his hands, unfamiliar, but he didn't have time to worry about that now. They approached the stronghold's outer wall, where two Khazar guards stood watch. They were tall, insectoid creatures, their exoskeletons gleaming under the red lights. Velzira moved like a shadow, drawing her blade. Before the guards could react, she slashed through one's chest and spun, cutting down the second in a single motion. Ethan blinked. You really don't waste time, do you? Velzira wiped her blade. Move. The team slipped inside, sticking to the shadows. Ethan's heart pounded as they weaved through the corridors, avoiding patrols. The Khazar were everywhere. He could hear their clicking voices, their heavy footsteps. Then they'd reached the shield generator chamber. Velzira motioned to Ethan. You disable it. Ethan froze. Wait, what? Me? She nodded. You trained for this. No, I trained to survive. This is different. But there was no time to argue. Ethan rushed to the control panel, scanning the alien symbols. His mind worked fast, recalling everything he had learned about Khazar technology. He pressed a sequence of buttons, and the generator hummed. The shield powered down. A distant alarm blared. Velzira's eyes narrowed. They know we are here. Ethan groaned. Of course they do. The escape. The moment they stepped into the hallway, Khazar warriors swarmed them. Blaster fire filled the air as Ethan ducked behind cover, returning fire with shaky hands. Velzira was a whirlwind of destruction, cutting through enemies with precise, lethal strikes. Kortal roared, firing heavy plasma rounds that tore through the insect-like raiders. Ethan shot one Khazar warrior in the chest, barely dodging a counterattack. His instincts were sharper now. He moved without thinking, reacting faster than before. Then, a deep growl rumbled down the corridor. A massive Khazar warlord emerged, twice the size of the others. His armor was thick, his claws dripping with venom. Ethan froze. Velzira's eyes narrowed. Ethan, with me. Ethan exhaled sharply and nodded. The warlord charged. Velzira lunged. And Ethan, for the first time since coming to the Xel Theory Empire, He didn't hesitate. The Khazar warlord was a towering beast, its thick exoskeleton gleaming under the dim red lights of the corridor. Its forearms flexed, each tipped with razor-sharp claws, and its mandibles clicked as it let out a deep guttural snarl. Ethan's breath hitched. Oh, that's not good. The warlord charged, its heavy footsteps shaking the metal floor. Velzira didn't hesitate. She moved like lightning, dodging left, her energy blade flashing as she slashed at the warlord's side. But her attack barely scratched its armor. Ethan had no time to think. He raised his plasma pistol and fired. The shot hit, but the warlord didn't even flinch. Instead, it swung one of its massive arms toward Velzira, forcing her to leap back. Kortal let out a battle cry and opened fire with his heavy plasma rifle. The warlord staggered slightly but then roared, charging straight at Ethan. "Oh, come on," Ethan yelped, diving out of the way as claws tore through the air where he had just been. He hit the ground hard, rolling onto his back. The warlord lunged, and Ethan barely managed to scramble away. Velzira took the chance. She leaped onto the warlord's back, driving her blade deep between its armored plates. The beast let out a deafening roar, thrashing wildly. Ethan's mind raced. It's too strong. We need to take it down fast. Then he saw it. A weak spot. A small gap in the warlord's thick armor near its neck, where Velzira's blade was already lodged. "Vale, hold on," Ethan shouted. He grabbed a plasma grenade from his belt, activated it, and threw it. The grenade landed perfectly in the gap. Velzira leaped off just as the explosion detonated, sending a shockwave through the corridor. The warlord let out a horrifying screech, its body twitching before collapsing with a loud crash. For a moment, there was silence. Then Kortal chuckled. "Ha! The human fights like a warrior." Ethan, still lying on the ground, groaned. "Yeah, well, I'd rather not make this a habit." Velzira stepped toward him, offering a hand. He hesitated for a second before grabbing it, letting her pull him up. Her golden eyes studied him for a brief moment. "You did well." Ethan blinked. Was that a compliment? Before he could respond, a voice crackled in their earpieces. "Strike team, this is command. The shields are down. Fleet attack is commencing." Velzira nodded. "Understood. We are extracting now." Ethan let out a breath of relief. Finally, we're getting out of here. But as they turned to leave, a distant explosion rumbled through the fortress. The walls shook, and alarms blared even louder. Kortal frowned. That was not from our fleet. Ethan's stomach sank. Then ho! A new voice echoed through the halls, distorted and alien. "You are fools to think this is over." Velzira's eyes narrowed. "No." A hologram flickered to life in front of them, revealing a dark, imposing figure, a Khazar overlord, dressed in ceremonial black armor with glowing red eyes that burned with malice. "You may have taken this outpost," the overlord sneered, "but your victory is meaningless. The real battle has yet to begin." Ethan's pulse quickened. Oh, great. That's never a good sign. The overlord's gaze settled on Velzira. "You should have accepted our rule, princess. Now, your entire empire will burn." And with that, the hologram vanished. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Kortal growled, "We need to leave. Now." Velzira nodded. Agreed. They rushed through the fortress, dodging falling debris and broken walls. The battle outside had already begun. The XL ferry fleet rained fire upon the stronghold, while the remaining Khazar forces fought back with desperate fury. Ethan's mind raced. The Khazar weren't just some random raiders. They were organized. And worse, they had a plan. They reached the extraction point, where their dropship was already waiting. Sci-Fi warriors covered them, firing at the remaining Khazar soldiers. Ethan and Velzira sprinted up the ramp just as the ship lifted off, the battle below growing smaller and smaller. Ethan collapsed into a seat, running a hand through his hair. "So, just to be clear," he muttered, "we're not done, are we?" Velzira sat across from him, her gaze hard. "No, we are not." Ethan sighed. "Yeah, that's what I thought." The ship soared into space, leaving the burning stronghold behind. But Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The Khazar Syndicate was bigger than they thought, stronger, and they had just made a very dangerous enemy. The dropship soared through space, leaving behind the burning remains of the Khazar stronghold. Inside, Ethan sat against the cold metal wall, still catching his breath. His heart was racing, his muscles aching, and his mind spinning with everything that had just happened. They had taken down a Khazar warlord. They had successfully disabled the shields. The XL Theory fleet had launched a full-scale attack. But it still didn't feel like a victory. Not after what the Khazar overlord had said. "You should have accepted our rule, princess. Now, your entire empire will burn." Ethan glanced at Velzira, who sat across from him, her golden eyes staring silently out the ship's window. She was deep in thought, her face unreadable. She knew something. The briefing. Back on the XL Theory flagship, Ethan and the strike team marched into the war chamber. The holographic table in the center displayed a map of the empire. But this time, there were dozens of red markers, Khazar forces. The XL Theory generals stood in silence. The tension was thick. Kortal crossed his arms. "Speak, princess. What do you know?" Velzira's voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it. The Khazar overlord's words were not an empty threat. She tapped a control panel, and a new hologram flickered into view. It was a massive Khazar battle station, floating in deep space, surrounded by warships. Ethan's stomach twisted. "That looks bad." Velzira nodded. "It is their central command, and we have just given them a reason to retaliate." One of the generals frowned. "You mean their invasion is already planned?" Velzira's eyes darkened. "Yes, and it will not be a simple raid. This time, they will come for everything." Silence filled the room. Ethan exhaled. "So what's our next move?" Velzira straightened. "We must strike first." The mission. The plan was simple, on paper. A small strike team would infiltrate the Khazar battle station, plant disruptors, and send a signal to the XL Theory fleet for a full-scale assault. But the Khazar weren't fools. Their station was one of the most heavily fortified places in the galaxy. Ethan groaned. "Why do all of our plans involve sneaking into enemy territory?" Kortal smirked. "Because it is more fun this way." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Yeah, super fun." Velzira turned to the team. "We leave in 1 hour. Prepare yourselves." Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. Just another suicide mission. No big deal. The infiltration. The stealth ship hovered just outside the battle station's detection range. Inside, the strike team was suited up and ready. Ethan checked his gear. Plasma pistol, energy blade, hacking device. He was getting used to this, which was a little terrifying. Velzira stood at the front. "We enter through the maintenance hatch. Move fast. Stay quiet." The ship's doors opened. The team leaped into space, their magnetic boots latching onto the station's outer hull. Ethan held his breath as they moved along the metal surface, the cold void of space stretching endlessly around them. One wrong step, and he'd be floating forever. Velzira reached the hatch, her claws working quickly to unlock it. With a hiss, the door slid open. They slipped inside. Inside the beast, the corridors were dark, lit only by the red emergency lights. The air smelled metallic, and the distant hum of machinery filled the silence. Ethan clutched his weapon, his pulse pounding. Kortal moved ahead, scanning the area. "No guards yet. They do not expect us." Velzira motioned forward. "We split up. Kortal, you take the north sector. Ethan, with me." Ethan tensed. "Oh, great. More bonding time." Velzira didn't reply, just started moving. Ethan sighed and followed. They navigated the winding corridors, dodging patrols and slipping past security drones. Finally, they'd reached the command room. Inside, a massive holographic display flickered, showing the XL Theory Empire, with multiple red markers closing in. Ethan's stomach dropped. They've already started moving their fleet. Velzira didn't hesitate. She pulled out the disruptor device and began setting it up. Then, a loud alarm blared. Ethan's heart stopped. They know we're here. The battle begins. The doors slammed open, and Khazar warriors poured in, weapons glowing. Velzira moved first, spinning her blade and slicing through the first enemy. Ethan dove for cover, firing his plasma pistol at the incoming soldiers. The room erupted into chaos. A Khazar warrior lunged at him, claws swinging. Ethan barely dodged, slamming his blade into the alien's side. It screeched and collapsed. Velzira fought with deadly precision, cutting through enemies like a storm. But then, a new figure entered the room. The Khazar Overlord. Ethan's blood ran cold. The Overlord's glowing red eyes locked onto Velzira. You cannot win, Princess. Velzira stood her ground. We will see. The Overlord charged, and Ethan knew this fight would decide everything. The Khazar Overlord moved like a storm, its massive claws swiping through the air with deadly precision. Velzira dodged, her energy blade flashing as she countered, but the Overlord was fast, too fast. Ethan barely had time to react before a wave of Khazar warriors rushed into the room. We're outnumbered, Ethan shouted, firing his plasma pistol. Cortel's voice crackled over the communicator. We are pinned down. What is happening in there? Ethan ducked behind a console, gritting his teeth. Just a small problem. Giant warlord trying to kill us. The Overlord let out a deep, guttural laugh. You think you can stop me? It lunged at Velzira. She barely blocked the attack, the force sending her skidding backward. Ethan gritted his teeth. They had seconds before the Khazar reinforcements overwhelmed them. His eyes darted to the disruptor device. It was almost armed, but they needed more time. Velzira leaped forward, her blade clashing with the Overlord's claws. Sparks flew as she fought with everything she had, but the Overlord was stronger. Ethan made a decision. He rushed forward, grabbing a shock charge from his belt. Hey, ugly, he shouted. The Overlord turned just as Ethan threw the charge. A direct hit. The explosion staggered the Overlord for just a moment. Velzira took the opening, spinning and driving her blade deep into its side. The Overlord let out a roar of pain, but it wasn't finished. With a snarl, it swung one massive claw. Velzira was too slow to dodge. The impact sent her crashing against the wall. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. She didn't move. No. The Overlord laughed. Pathetic. Ethan's grip tightened on his pistol. You shouldn't have done that. Something inside him snapped. He charged forward, plasma pistol in one hand, energy blade in the other. The Overlord swung. Ethan ducked. He slid under its massive arm and stabbed his blade into the small gap in its armor. The Overlord snarled, trying to shake him off, but Ethan held on, pressing his pistol against the same wound, and fired. The plasma blast pierced through. The Overlord let out a final roar, its body shuddering. Then it collapsed to the ground. Dead. Ethan staggered back, his hands shaking. He turned to Velzira. Zyra. She groaned, slowly pushing herself up. I am. Fine. Ethan let out a breath of relief. Don't scare me like that. She gave him a tired look. You fought well. Ethan smirked. You too. The disruptor device beeped. Armed. Cortel's voice came over the communicator. Fleet is in position. Are you ready? Velzira nodded. Do it. Ethan hit the detonator. Boom. The disruptor sent a massive energy pulse through the station, shutting down every system. The Khazar fleet outside suddenly lost power, their ships drifting helplessly in space. And then, the XL ferry fleet attacked. Escape and victory. Alarms blared as the battle station shook violently. The power grid was failing, fires spreading through the corridors. Ethan grabbed Valzera's arm. "We need to move." They raced through the halls, dodging falling debris as the station collapsed around them. Kortal's dropship hovered at the docking bay, its doors wide open. Ethan and Valzera jumped aboard just as the entire battle station exploded behind them. The ship sped away, leaving the burning wreckage behind. From the window, Ethan saw the XL ferry fleet finishing off the disabled Khazar ships. The war was over. Ethan collapsed into a seat, breathing hard. "We actually did it." Kortal laughed. "A glorious victory." Valzera sat beside Ethan. "It is because of you." Ethan blinked. "Me? I just ran around and got lucky." She shook her head. "No, you fought like a warrior. And you saved me." Ethan scratched the back of his neck. "Well, I guess that makes us even." Valzera smiled slightly. "Perhaps." The ship soared toward the XL ferry fleet. The battle was won. The Empire was safe. But Ethan had a feeling. This was only the beginning.